Hello, I'm Simon Hope and welcome to this KS YouTube channel. We're going to make a fairly simple bowl. We're going to sort of talk through the ins and outs, how to mount it. We're going to play around, we're going to maybe use the beading tool, use the texturing tool, do some sanding and just talking basics about making perhaps your first bowl or adding decoration to a simple bowl you've already made yourself. We're going to mount this bowl with a screw chuck that fits inside the chuck, so we'll show you how that's done. This is a record chuck and it comes with this particular screw chuck. Most chucks will come with one of these and they just fit inside the jaws. There's some flats on here that have to be located inside. So let me just show you how that fits. And you can sort of wobble it and you can feel the flats hit the inside jaws. And when you sort of feel that, let me just demonstrate, yeah, I can sort of feel the flats there. And that just goes on in the inside and you just fully lock down. So we need to drill a hole in our bowl blank. This needs to be the face, so you need to look at the bit of wood, make sure that you get the right side. Maybe there's like a crack or a bit missing here. That needs to be the bottom, because that's going to be the bottom of the bowl, so the hole goes to the top of the bowl. The drill normally is about 2mm smaller than the outside of here. We just simply drill in, make sure that you have it level, you don't want to go any angles. I've already drilled this down to the right depth. And just double check that you have gone deep enough. So I normally just use some verniers. You can drop that in and you can measure to make sure that the hole is deep enough. But of course be careful that you don't go too deep because you'll have a hole in the bottom of your bowl. So to mount this, there's basically two ways. You can put your spindle lock on. This is the safest way if you're not used to using one of these. Use your spindle lock and you can just screw the wood on like so till it butts up to the jaws. Now when it's there you want to do it and then just a little bit. You don't keep putting too much force because you'll actually tear the wood and then it becomes loose. You might see on some films that professional users will actually turn the lathe on very slow. They'll hold the wood and just drive it on and let go at the last second. That's up to you. Be very careful if you try this. It's much safer if you just lock the spindle and do it manually. So we're going to start doing some shaping. If you're fairly new to turning a bowl, I would recommend that you trim the outside first. If you're a little bit more experienced, then normally I would just cut the waste away at the back and it saves time trimming that up. But maybe you have a small lathe, maybe it's your first bowl, then I would recommend just to turn the outside first. So let's fire up the lathe and get started. So before you actually switch on, always make sure you turn the piece of wood to make sure it doesn't hit the rest. The rest wants to be as close as possible. The rest wants to be just below the center line. Make sure everything's fully locked off. Then we can turn the lathe on, turn the speed up to a safe speed. It really depends on your lathe. Like a big strong lathe like this, you could probably go straight up to like 2000 RPM or something. But as a general rule, somewhere around about 1000 RPM, as long as the wood's trued. If it starts vibrating, then maybe it needs to be a lower speed, but you'll get to feel that with your lathe. Now to start cutting, I like to use a swept back bowl gouge. You can use additional grinds, but this is the one I like to use. We never have the flute fully up. You have to tilt the flute open, and then here's the bevel at the back, and we need to make that in line with the direction of cut. Yep, so this is how we're going to cut. This is how I work. I hold it like this. And if you have the angle correct, which is this angle at the back, then yeah, it's very, very easy to use. Yeah, it's that back bevel there is the critical one. If you have the angle wrong, it wants to sort of catch around, and it's all about that back angle there. So get that correct. And everything cuts very, very easily. So we're going to just true the front up before we actually do our shaping. There's two ways you can do this, especially with the swept back gouge. The swept back gouge is a bit more versatile, more sort of modern way of using the bowl gouge if you like. But always you should have the tool rest so you're pointing slightly up towards the centre. You don't want to be parallel, or certainly don't want to be pointing down to meet that centre. So you want to be that sort of angle there, pointing up towards the centre. So we can trim the face of that up using exactly the same method as what we've done the outside. So the flute halfway closed, this bevel at the back in line with the piece of wood, and we can simply start cutting here to the centre. So let me show you that. I'll just do that one more time so that you can see. So here's the bevel, this in line with the direction that we're going to cut. We're going to come back onto the edge, slowly get started. Now if you start to cut too much, then reduce the angle a little bit. If you start to cut too less and come out, then adjust the angle until you just do a nice even cut going forward. So the other way that you can use the swept back bowl gouge is to actually use it cutting on this lower wing. It's maybe more of a sort of modern way of cutting, but it does remove material very quickly. So I will show you how that works in case you want to try yourself, but I'll also show you the normal way with the bevel rubbing. So to use this cut, the flute again halfway closed. The wood's going to come round and actually hit that lower wing. You can use it sort of parallel, but it'll make the tool very blunt quickly. So the more you lower the handle, the more of a cut that it's going to make. So do not have the angle this way and approach the wood, because that will dig in. So always closed, always handle down, and this way you can see how it cuts. And you can take material away very, very quickly and easily. So I'm just creating some shapes just by moving my hand in and out. All depends on which shape you want to produce. So we can add a foot to the bowl, we can curve this way, and then we can curve back the other way and create what shape that we like. So I'm just going to tidy this up. The thing is, with using that sort of cut, it doesn't leave a very good finish. So I always do use a bevel rubbing cut to make my finishing cut. So I'll just show you that on this piece. Then we can get into the projects and do our shaping, and I've explained the two ways that I've used the bowl gouge. So this way, with the bevel rubbing, again the flute halfway closed, we're going to just get the bevel rubbing on the back there. Yeah, and once it starts cutting, the bevel rubs against the wood. Leave just a very tiny amount of pressure to leave the wood, the bevel rubbing on the wood, and then you can move forward and do a nice finishing cut. Yeah, you can see the shavings coming off. If you're getting shavings like that, everything's working correctly. Here I moved a little bit and it shows with the lines, and with practice you can get a nice smooth operation and get a nice clean cut. We'll demonstrate that a little bit later on. So we need to mount this in the chuck when we reverse it round, and we can either make a recess or a spigot that we grab onto. So this is a large spigot, so if we had large jaws we could sort of grip on the outside of that. We're going to do a recess, which I think is slightly safer way of holding. So if you're fairly new to bowls, I'd recommend that you do a recess first. So these particular drawers are 55mm. So I'm just going to mark sort of where the centre is. And then we can just simply measure our size. So half of 55, yeah, it wants to be about there. And then we can just put our pencil on there and mark that. Just double check that that is 55. It's 52, we need to go a little bit more. Yeah, perfect. And then just simply step in. There's different ways of doing this, but if you just use your parting tool and just make short steps into the recess, like so. This one's quite shallow. This one's about 2mm. It needs to be slightly more than that. Let's go to the pencil line. So we want to be about 4 to 5mm to be quite a safe grip. You don't want it too deep. Just gently tidy that up, like so. And then we need a slight dovetail on there. You can use the edge of a skew, laid flat. I can use my detail tool. Again, I can leave that flat on there. And you want a very, very slight dovetail just on the inside edge, just like so. So we can start playing around a little bit now. You can leave it plain, you can get it sanded, you can put some lines in there for decoration, or you could use perhaps a texturing tool. So this is the Hope Mini Texturing box set. It comes with 2 different sizes of wheels. They have bearings, the only mini system that has bearings set in, and these are hardened, and again the only system available that the teeth are actually hardened, and these simply screw in, so you can interchange them very, very quickly. The hole in there just to make sure that's tight, and you can lock it down just like so. So you need to give yourself a gap in order to make this operate. Yeah, so you don't want to be resting on the hole, so the rest needs to be just back from there. Give yourself like 2-finger whip gap. And pretty much you can do so many different designs. Like, you just need to pick up the tool and play around to find what design you like. I mean, there's some presets, i.e. if I turn the speed down slow, about 400, and I have this at 45 degree, I know it's going to give me some sort of a spiral effect, which we're going to demonstrate now. If you have a fast speed like this, it will give an orange peel. If you have a fast speed at 45, it gives a different effect again. So just play around. I'll show you a few different designs, and you can see that you can get different effects using this tool, and it's good fun. Okay, let's get started. So not on the center, just slightly out. This is at 45, slight angle this way, and let's start cutting. And there we just have a spiral effect. Different speeds will give you different effects, different pressures pushing forward will give you different effects, but it just starts to show you what's possible. So now I'm just going to shape the outside of the bowl. I'll do a nice sort of ogee shape, using the 2 methods that we're already showing you with the bowl gouge, and we'll get that done fairly quickly, get it trimmed, get it sanded, and then we can start playing around with some beading tools and some more texturing techniques. So let's start shaping. Now we're going to do a bevel rubbing cut. This is going to be our finishing cut. It's not necessary, but I'd just like to show you the negative rake tools, and we can get a better finish. We can start with the convex, and that's very good for getting into the tight corners. And we can just sweep this around. You can see the shavings coming off. It takes all the bevel rubs away, and if you haven't got your shape 100% correct, it's a very, very easy way of just making fine adjustments. So we'll swap over to the round one, and the round one into the quick release, and then we can just pick up that point and just finish into the corner. Perfect. So we're just going to do a couple of beads with the beading tool. We'll show you how that works. We'll maybe do one bead here, one bead up here, and then we'll sort of add some texturing close to that. So you want to be working on the sort of centre line. You don't use it this way, you have to use it this way up for safety. And then what we're going to do is, as we start cutting, I sort of pivot on the left hand point, and we're going to sort of pivot like this as we cut in, and you stop short of the apex, and then you just sort of wobble the last little bit very carefully to get a nice clean bead. So let me demonstrate how that works. So we're going to start cutting, yeah, so just push in, and as you start pushing in, I'm just going to little sort of pivot on the left hand side. Yeah, just keep working that in, keep working it in. You can see we're just starting to get to the apex, and as that gets smaller and smaller and smaller, we're going to stop just before we get to the main apex. Just clear the shavings, and what we're going to do is we're just going to go in, just very carefully wobble left to right until we get that complete bead. So now we'll do one around about sort of quarter of the way in up here. Start pushing, tilting up and down on the left hand point. Push, 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 just before we get to the top of the apex. Okay, we take out and clear, and just gently wobble left to right, just until we get to the top of the apex. Perfect. Now you can see I actually haven't gone 100%. There's a tiny little flat on the apex, and that means I just need to go just a little bit more. Now we've done that, and we have a perfect bead. So you might say, why do I do this method of sort of wobbling? If you just push in directly, the tips will very easily overheat, and it will actually burn the timber and cause more tear out. So by wobbling like this, it just eases the cut as it moves forward, gives a bit of finish, allows it not to sort of build up too much heat and burn the timber. And that's why I do this, and then just finish with a small wobble just to get a nice clean finish. And yeah, it works. So we're going to play around with the texturing tool and maybe get some more designs in some places. I might try and get something on this edge here. So I'm going to keep the larger head on. Speed is going to be around about the sort of 700 mark. And I'm just going to use the side edge here, the side bevel, and we can see that puts an indentation on that edge. And now we're going to swap the head over and just show you a different type of texture with the small head. Allen key in so you can and tighten. Simply swap heads and then key in the hole just so you can nip up and just lock that down. So now we're going to do a running texture on this part, but the speed is going to be high. Again, allow yourself room that you're not actually impeding yourself. Yeah, so somewhere about here. Speed's going to be about 1000, 1200 RPM, something like that. And we're going to just go 45 degrees. You can go back and forth, apply a little bit of pressure. Then we can get a really fine texture patterning on the edge of that rim.
Just give me a second.
Can I move it?
Yeah.
So we're going to do just a little bit of sanding. Actually, only this area here really needs to be sanded. There's a bit of a burr on that edge, so the fine grit will get rid of that. And because we use the negative rakes, we can start at something like 240 grit. 240 in, let me lean over and get the extraction on. I always stop and check to make sure that all the main marks have been taken out. Just a little bit here. And then we can just click through the grits. This is 320, 400, and then 600. And now I have the 600 grit. I maybe just do a quick bit here and just a quick bit on that edge just to get rid of those burrs. And then if I want to sand the beads, I actually turn the speed down, yeah, because we're going to hand sand this, so we need to turn the speed down to about sort of 500 RPM. And then we can get that tucked in. And I'll just roll over from one side to the other. This is just the fine grit, just to tidy up those beads. Yeah, job done. So spindle lock in so that we can unscrew this. Screw chuck out. Close the jaws, and then we're going to lift this into place, put the pressure on the centre and just carefully unwind until it just pinches into position like so. Now we don't want to put too much pressure on there, so you want to nip it up, and I always move to the second position just to get rid of any play within the chuck. Yeah, and I just move from one to the other until I find the resistance so that it doesn't turn anymore. But not, not too much power. Just enough to make sure it's pinched tight. It's pretty close. It's maybe like 0.5 millimetre out, but that's within reasons. If you have trouble centralising it up, you can use the tailstock to keep the pressure on this way before you tighten up. But yeah, honestly, 0.5 mil or so is fine. So let's just true the face up. So now we're going to start turning the inside of the bowl. We want to leave some sort of rim for decoration, and I think that would look quite nice. So somewhere, I normally say about 1/4 of the radius. So obviously the radius from that point to that point. So somewhere about there, I think is visually acceptable. So it's important that you point up towards the centre. You don't want to be parallel like this with the rest. So the rest wants to be low enough that you're pointing up towards the centre. And then we're going to start with the gouge over here and literally start to scoop inwards to the centre like so. Again, make sure your flute is always halfway closed. Speed is 1500 RPM just for reference. So we're going to start way over here and we're just going to pivot in like so to the centre. Now just a little trick, what I always do is leave the bevel rubbing when we come out, and then it puts it at the right angle to come back in again. Keep the bevel rubbing, come out. Always slow down when you get to the last core, because that's turning very, very slowly compared to the outside edge. If you go too fast at this point, you could actually pull the bowl from the jaws. So this bit is always nice and slowly. Before we do a finishing cut, which is normally a very fine cut, we'll just do some measuring to see how deep we've gone. You can use a ruler like this, simply put it on the centre, eye up the top rim with the bottom rim, and when they're in line, you can either read what measurement there is or just put your thumb on there, and you can transfer that to there and see how deep we've gone. So that's actually probably about the right sort of depth there, just using that by eye. Maybe we can go a little bit deeper, but that's looking about correct. We can also use my bowl measuring calipers. Very simply, they go in and you just read off how thick it is. So that's 17mm there, so that's still actually quite thick. Going down to the bottom, it's off the scale, it's 20mm. So there's plenty of room, 20mm thick there. If we wanted to go deeper and make that thinner at the bottom, there's plenty of scope to do so. We'll do that on my finishing cuts. Okay, now we're getting to the sort of finishing cuts. I normally just give that a quick sharpen, which I've just done. But we're also going to just play around just a little bit. So I'm going to, rather than having that flat, adjust the angle slightly. Perhaps use the beading tool for the edge, and then we can just do our finishing cuts just to finish off. I never like to see a flat edge on the bowl like this, so I always like to see a chamfer. It looks much better. So we're just going to do a nice clean cut with our sharpen tool. And we're just going to do a finishing cut with the bevel rubbing along the face. And now I'm going to go and get the beading tool to do some decoration on this edge. So now we're going to put a bead on the edge. I'm just going to go roughly sort of about here. I'm still going to do my movement. Pivot, pivot, pivot on the left hand side, just till we get to the apex. Then I stop, clear, and Just going to wobble on that last second to get that nice and clean. Now you can see we've just left with a little bit of a ridge on here, and now when I do my finishing cuts we could actually turn that away so we have a nice clean bead leading into the bottom of the bowl. So now we're going to do our finishing cut. So rather than guessing the angle, I still like to come here, rub the bevel all the way up, and then I know the right angle to start. Nice and slow to finish. As tooling goes, I've got that pretty good actually on the last cut there. You do always get those slight bevel rubs, and normally you would sand those out. So 120 grit onwards, they would actually sand out quite easily. To improve on that, we could use the negative rake. It's not necessary, but it's a nice tool just to take the bevel rubs away and make any fine adjustment to the shape. So the tool rest is in the position for the bowl gouge, which is below centre. For the negative rake, we want to be on the centre, so we need to raise the rest up slightly. A little bit more. Yeah, we're good to go. Okay, let's just get that finished. We only need a fine tickle. Yeah, you can see how the tool works. You get that really nice shaving coming off. The rest is just a little bit too high there, but we can do just one more cut just to finish that off. Just a little bit more of a bevel rub on that part. I'm just going to go over one more time. Shape looks good, and we're ready for sanding. Okay, we're going to get that sanded up, and I'm going to use my Pro Sander Professional kit. It has all 6 heads, and you can just click through very quickly on each grit. So we'll start with 120. So I hold it like this, get it spinning. Just move it across to the centre, like so. I always check after the first grit to make sure any marks are out. There's a tiny one there, I think that will come out with the next one. And then we can just click through very, very quickly and easily through each grit. Speed-wise it's quite fast, so that's about 1800. This spins very quickly, and we just want to do short positive first and be careful not to overheat the pads. Just blend in the bead just a little bit as I'm going, and maybe just do a little bit on the edge. I'm going to texture that in a second. You can also do this edge. And finally 600 grit. And just take off the sharp edge. So we're going to finish with some running texture on the outside rim, just with the fine wheel of the Hope texturing kit. Speed is around about 1200 RPM, I think. This is at 45. We can give just a very fine lick over with some fine grit and just get rid of the dust and blend in the top of that bead. I hope you enjoyed watching that small project on this bowl, and we'll see you on another video. Thanks for watching.
Backside.